It's true. There is a rather fascist, scorched earth, realpolitik, might makes right kind of thuggery that is showing up. I think Gen Z is seeing it and disgusted.
Hi, this is Frank Schaeffer, and you are watching and or listening to my podcast, In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. Today, my guest has written a very interesting book we're going to talk about, but he's someone I want to talk with anyway, and that is Roger Wolsey, and his new book is called Kissing Fish, Christianity for People Who Don't Like Christianity. And hold the book up a second. And
well, that was the first book that came.
Sorry, Kissing Fish. That's the book that's the book that I do have here. The other one I don't have here, which is Discovering Fire: Spiritual Practices That Transform Lives. Let me ask you a question. Have we met somewhere before?
Yes, we met at the Wild Goose Festival. I've been there several times. I don't remember which year, but we did meet one of the years.
Yeah, I was telling Ernie, I'm all mixed up because I said I actually know this guy, and I put it together. But I mentioned Ernie that I thought it was Wild Goose that we had met and talked, and that's why I think I'm talking about Kissing Fish: Christianity for People Who Don't Like Christianity, because if I recall right, you were talking about that at Wild Goose, or we talked about it together. Am I wrong? I'm sorry, I'm so vague, but
we definitely did. That's right. Yeah, I spoke there 3 times, and I think it was probably the first or second time that I spoke that we connected. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks. Sorry to sound muddled there, but I knew we had a connection. Let me ask you for a quick description of Discovering Fire: Spiritual Practices. As I understand it, this follows the book Kissing Fish in the sense that you're writing to people from the point of view of trying to introduce them to a perspective that is represented by what you would call progressive Christianity, in the sense of saying, look, guys, you're walking away from any connection to church and religion. Are you aware there are alternatives to the kind of white Christian nationalist evangelical juggernaut that's out there? There are people who still call themselves Christians, but we are not all part of that. Have I put words in your mouth, or is that sort of what you're writing to?
That speaks to it pretty darn well. Absolutely. Yeah.
Good. Well, talk about the book. Talk about the process of Discovering Fire. How did you come to write this book? How does it differ from your previous work, Kissing Fish: Christianity for People Who Don't Like Christianity? What is different about Discovering Fire in the sense of content, practices that transform lives? Talk about those practices a little bit.
All right. So the first book was more like a primer, an introduction to progressive Christianity, sort of comparing and contrasting progressive Christianity and, loosely speaking, conservative Christianity. Most of that book, there's 2 sections, section 1 and 2. Most of it's sort of a systematic theology that's in a conversational way. Section 2 is basically the push-ups of love, practices that can help foster a more loving way of being. And this Discovering Fire basically takes section 2 of that and goes much further in greater depth and covers far more a range of spiritual practice. In a way, it's sort of a bridge between the spiritual practices that are life-giving and transforming from within organized religion, and also the spiritual practices that are perceived as being outside of organized religion. You think maybe the Burning Man community, ecstatic dance, even plant medicine, psilocybin, ayahuasca, tarot cards, authentic relating, possibly astrology, things that are less considered organized religion, more in the realm of spiritual but not religious. And I've dabbled in both. I lived in Boulder for 14 years, Boulder, Colorado, where I was immersed and surrounded by so many opportunities and perspectives. And no longer, even though I'm a United Methodist Christian pastor, no longer can I say that any one religion or spiritual lineage has a monopoly. They're all voices that matter, and spirit is at work in all of them. So the hope is to reduce some allergy and wariness that each side might have about the other, and realize that spirit is profoundly at work in life-giving ways in so many of these beautiful practices.
Let me ask you a question now before I forget it. And then we're going to double back and I'm going to get to this. But before we get to this question I'm about to ask you, let's go and just talk about you personally for a minute. Family, where you live, the church you're at, the pastoring you've done. We're going to do that. But the question I want to get to after that I want to put in the back of your mind to think about, is that it seems to me that as I observe what's going on in the realm of spirituality per se in our country, you have the rise of Wicca and witchcraft and tarot cards and all this kind of spirituality. You have the demise of organized religion and everybody calling themselves nuns on forums, N-O-N-E, like they don't do church. But in a weird way, it seems that in terms of spiritual practice, seeking and energy, there's more now than at any time that I remember. And of course, that ranges from crazy far right-wing Christian nationalism, very energized, gun-toting, militaristic, angry Christianity, and a kind of a pagan neo-fascist group that goes with that, but very spiritual, all the way to my podcast co-host of another podcast I do called Love in Common with Ernie Gregg, who is my producer on this show, and our friend Erin Bagwell, who's a movie producer and director, young woman, young mother, and she's much more attuned to the kind of spirituality you're talking about in your book that's non-church. She came from a Catholic background, but, you know, somewhat facetiously, she describes herself sometimes as a sort of a witchy, crystal-carrying person. But what's not happening is what I thought was going to happen when I was in my 20s and the son of an evangelical pastor. We were told that what was coming was kind of a juggernaut of secularism, atheism, what we called secular humanism. That actually hasn't happened, where people may not be going to church, but there's an intense spirituality out there. So I want you to talk about in a moment how that strikes you, that it's spirituality, but without traditional religion. Let's get back to that in a minute. First, where are you sitting right now?
I am in my home in Grand Junction, Colorado, although I've been here the last 3 years.
Yeah.
I was in Boulder, Colorado for 14 years as a director of a Wesley Foundation campus ministry at the University of Colorado Boulder. Before that, I was pastor of, one of 3 pastors at a large church outside of Denver in Littleton. Prior to that, I was pastor of 4 little churches in rural Iowa. At the same time, prior to that, I was pastor of a Methodist church outside of Minneapolis, and did my seminary at the Iliff School of Theology in Denver. And I'm currently pastor at the Fruita United Methodist Church, which is a community just west of Grand Junction, closer to Utah.
Okay, and you know my journey. We won't go through it here, but I've written about it in my memoir, Crazy for God, and other books. Like Why I'm an Atheist Who Believes in God, et cetera, et cetera. Far right evangelical, fundamentalist family. My dad was a pastor, becomes a national hero to evangelical right-wingers. Fast forward to the present, and we have all the people who voted for Donald Trump and still think he's president are the kind of people who came out of that religious climate of right-wing Christianity. That's my passage out of that. That's where I come from. Give me a thumbnail of your journey. Did you have an evangelical iteration before? Is your journey from right to moderate, or left to right? Or how do you see yourself? What was your family about? Your parents?
Yeah.
What's your religious background?
So my parents met at the Wesley Foundation at the University of Kansas in Lawrence, Kansas. And my twin sister and I were born in 1968, the year the United Methodist Church became the United Methodist Church. During college, she went to a college in Wisconsin. I went to a college in Iowa and then in Minnesota. She got involved with InterVarsity, which is a more conservative evangelical campus ministry. And I was at Macalester College in a more student-led informal campus ministry. She ended up going in a more evangelical direction and got rebaptized. In Methodists, we don't rebaptize, we reaffirm baptisms, but in a way that was kind of an estranged time, because she basically was, without saying it, telling me my own original baptism wasn't good enough, and my faith was churchianity and not enough believing the right things, kind of evangelical perspective. During college, I, of course, wandered and did all sorts of different things. Wasn't overtly Christian until my senior year, and then I became more intentionally Christian. And what I would say is, that progressive Christianity has two wings to the airplane or the bird. One is from the liberal mainline Protestant, the postmodern influenced evolution of that, if you will, and the emerging church, which is the postmodern influenced evolution of evangelical Christianity, came out in, Doug Paget and Rachel Held Evans and who's our Love Wins guy, Rob Bell. Those are some names from that lineage.
Sure.
And Brian McLaren and others have there's been a sort of a conflation. But my part of that airplane, that bird, is coming from the liberal. I graduated from seminary in '96, and those are the years that liberal Christianity is morphing more and more into progressive Christianity. So I was part of that trajectory more than from the evangelical. Yeah.
From the evangelical side. Ernie, my producer, Ernie Gregg, just messaged me saying to remind me to tell you that you might be interested, that we just, on this podcast, In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, a couple of weeks ago, we interviewed Daniel Pinchback about his what they call the psychedelic renaissance and all the writing he's done on that, as well as the environment and so forth. And so, you two sort of bookend that, because he's very much on the non-Christian side in terms of traditional Christianity, but of a spiritual renaissance where now he's spending his whole adult life investigating everything from mushrooms he's taken in the jungle somewhere to, you're talking about the Burning Man, the bridge between the Burning Man experience and what you're doing. So let's get back to the question I asked you now I'd like to get into, and that is this idea of spirituality being very resurgent right now, but so amorphous and undefined that it's hard to correlate that with anything related to what you're doing, say, as a minister. These are people who do not darken the door of churches, progressive or otherwise. They would have, little interest in what you do for a living as a pastor or what we're talking about here. They would just see that as unrelated. Why would they get involved with that? And your book sort of addresses this. But before we get into the book, let's talk about just the phenomena in itself. When I was growing up as the son of an apologist for evangelical Christianity, he was predicting a kind of a move toward almost a radical secular atheism, as if somehow the university culture of ideas, humanistic thinking, science-based views would completely engulf and destroy not just Christianity, but any spiritual sense, that we would be complete secularists. Mm. That has not happened. We live in a very touchy-feely, witchcrafty, crystals all the way down, post-New Agey continuance of that phenomena. So first of all, address that. I know you're an observer of these things. How do you see that happening, and where is this going?
Yeah, it is. So definitely it is the case that I have a 22-year-old son who's just graduated college, and I journeyed with him watching his 4 years of college and his experience. I've got friends who have 18 and 16-year-old kids and what have you. And I'm thinking of people whose parents were raised in the church, but the kids definitely want nothing to do with it. And I'm seeing people definitely engaging in tarot cards, definitely having late night conversations. Maybe they're smoking pot, but they're talking about God and swapping God experiences with each other. I hear a profound respect for Jesus and a profound yearning for the church that they know is out there to actually be more like the Jesus that they think they know. That I hear quite a bit. So I don't think there's any loss of love for Jesus, but there is a disillusionment with what political parties, with anything institutional, basically. That is more and more the case. So there's more free agency, and more empowerment to sort of pick and choose what's out there. Oh, these Christians are doing fasting. Tell me more about this centering prayer. Oh, labyrinths. What's the backstory on that? So there is a curiosity. They may never ever want to be part of a church. Some do. I know of some young people that are particularly looking at the more mystic oriented Eastern Orthodox church or Episcopal church. I'm hearing some of that kind of interest in some quarters. But more and more, it's more of a empowerment to sort of pick and choose and put together their own spiritual collage of what works for them and compare notes with each other. So it's the beauty of that is it's very empowered, and there's a bit of a cutting out of the middleman and more direct sharing of how they're experiencing spirit. And it's actually quite beautiful, although I imagine it could be threatening to some people whose lives and livelihoods are dependent upon people showing up in their doors. But if they can relax the agenda and allow people to have more of a share swapping stories perspective, they actually do appreciate lineage and tradition. There's a lot of respect I see among young people, but they also, they're done with bullshit. They're done with superficial. They're done with bait and switch. They're done with insincere. So if there's any smack of that, they're out.
Yeah, and there's other factors too that, of course, a lot of people are addressing in a lot of the books I've been reading when it comes to trends and directions. And futurology is always a little bit iffy. Things don't turn out. The law of unintended consequences is the one that actually always seems to happen rather than predictions. But it does seem that with the smartphones and the kind of smartphone addiction and the tech immersion that everybody's growing up with now, that the whole playing field has changed in terms of all human experience. And talk about just person-to-person connection. People are dating through their iPhones, can hardly meet your eyes and make connections of any kind. This is not likely to pull them into any face-to-face group. They're not doing face-to-face. Their connections are not those of my generation, certainly, or even yours. You got going, 10, 15 years later than I did, but we still come from a time when the norm was getting together with people in person. The norm today is isolation. And then you've got these polls and these studies being done on the loneliness epidemic on the other side. So in a way, it seems that a lot of younger people, if you could prescribe something for them, it would be get rid of your iPhone and make face-to-face connections with people. Forget this kind of netherworld of electronics and tech media for a while, and just settle down into the rhythm of a more humane and human life. It would seem to me that a spiritual group that would hold out those sorts of connections could be very attractive to people, whether it's called a church or something else. I mean, don't you find some sort of longing for the kind of connection which is harder and harder to come by?
Yeah. So one thing that's a bit of an interesting, strange gift, let's call it an anomaly, a lemons into lemonades kind of a moment. So my son entered college the fall of his freshman year, and then the spring of his freshman year, COVID hit, and campus life radically changed, and people were back home with their parents or grandparents or whatever, doing school online for 2 years, and they've been gradually coming back and back on campus. And for those folks, there's a profound increased yearning and craving for in-person visits and connection. There's like, oh my gosh, people again. Anything that's community, they have an accelerated, enhanced yearning because of that deviant experience that happened in their college years. So that's one subset of young people, but it affects lots of people in a bigger way. So in a way, that COVID experience has, if anything, has increased some desire to reconnect. But the pastors that I talk to, they are not at the same average attendance in person that they were before COVID. And there's more and more people, they do hybrid worship where people are watching online, maybe live or maybe after during the week later. So there's an increase in online connection, a little bit of a notable decrease in in-person connection in the churches. But outside, the gong baths, the yoga nidra, sound baths, drum circles, those things are back and increasing. And maybe there's a resurgence, I would guess now larger than before COVID because of the desire to reconnect with people. Yeah.
Yeah. Ernie sent me another note just talking about the resurgence of orthodoxy. Do you think that's sort of a longing for rigidity and certainty of a generation that is very cut off from those things, or is that just a footnote?
Well, in terms, the people that I know that are drawn to Eastern Orthodox or Catholicism or Episcopal that weren't raised in those things, but are gravitating to them, I'm not seeing the common denominator to be more like a fundamentalist yearning for things to be all figured out. It's more an appreciation for longevity, lineage, not a lot of change over many years. There's something about the oldness of it. Like when the Americans came here, everything English continental was thumbs down. Anything new was the thing. But a lot of the young people now, they're done with novel and new and more interested in the what's historic, what's got lineage. So that's one piece. The other thing is, I think at their best, the Eastern Orthodox, the Roman Catholic, the Episcopal have mystic, strong bones of mysticism. And I think that mysticism piece is what allows for connection to other religions, other denominations, and they have strong suits in that. And I think that's part of the draw.
Yeah, in your new book, Discovering Fire, Spiritual Practice That Transforms Lives, tell me what the centrality of your, if you want to call it this, your argument is, in the sense that, let's talk about this sort of disconnected, disenfranchised younger reader. First of all, practically speaking, what makes you think that any of the people who would be most interested in your book would read it? And I know that sounds like a very snarky question, but it's one as a writer I face all the time. And that is, when I make my little video commentaries on Substack, or my comments in the context of a podcast, at least I'm speaking in the medium of the moment, whether anybody's listening or not. When I work on a new book, often with a nonfiction book, I have the frustrating feeling that the very people that I should be addressing the most are the exact ones who will never encounter this book in book form because they're not reading. And if you're aiming a book called Discovering Fire, Spiritual Practice That Transforms Lives to anybody younger than yourself, I'm wondering strategically, what makes you think you're going to have a reader?
Well, so I'll share in an anecdotal way and then in a broader way. So my 25-year-old nephew, so my twin sister who became a bit more evangelical, her son pushed back against that. He pushed back against the more evangelical churchiness that he grew up with, and has most of his high school and college life nothing to do with religion. But when his uncle Roger wrote this book, he actually read it and loved it, and he's wanting all of his friends to know about it. So for him, this is meeting a need and helping him understand things from a progressive Christian perspective that looks at all of these things, that holds and includes things. So I don't want to out his particulars, but things that he's engaged with, there's a certain yearning for, is it okay? Can a Christian pastor say this is okay? Is there a blessing that, hey, these things that I'm up to are actually okay and of God? And I think there's maybe a bit of a yearning for some people to know that, hey, these things aren't opposed to God, or not all Christians are going to say that you're going to hell because you're engaged in these things.
Let me flip it a second and help you focus on the other side of this. Picture one of the 75,000 students at Liberty University, Jerry Falwell's old thing, where ironically I spoke 40 years ago or so. I spoke from the pulpit there when I was part of that world. But picture those kids today I know that on those campuses or Wheaton College or even places like Bob Jones, there's always an element, and I think it's a growing element, that are really dissatisfied with being labeled as Christian nationalists, white evangelicals, and they're looking for something else. Would this be a book that cohort could find something in as well? In other words, could you go to somebody still in the conservative evangelical milieu and they might pick up Discovering Fire and find something in there that would intrigue them? Or is it really just for your Burning Man people who came from evangelical background and are still...
Yeah, so there's two audiences. There's the spiritual but not religious audience that are disaffected, disillusioned by organized religion, maybe were never a part of it, but want to see would be curious about a Christian pastor talking about these things that they're engaging in or hearing about. But the flip side is there's a lot of people in churches, conservative ones like Liberty folk, Wheaton folk, or more mainline Protestant folks, but their kids aren't going to church, but they are going to yoga. They are going to, they're doing psilocybin journeys. They are going to circling, authentic relating. They're doing ecstatic dance. They're into tarot cards, whatever. And they don't understand it, but they see it. And those folks are curious. Well, why are they drawn to these things? What are they getting out of that? Is God somehow there? Do I need to be concerned? Do I need to pray for their souls? And those folks will have a curiosity seeing a Christian pastor who's engaged in these very practices, sharing a Christian perspective on this and understanding, not that it's telling them to do these things, but at least they're seeing someone thinking through it, experiencing through it. And I think it will explain why those grandkids, their nephews, their neighbors, whatever, are doing these things and not coming to church.
You know, one thing I just want to break for a moment and reintroduce you. Folks who are watching this or listening, this is a podcast called In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. I am Frank Schaeffer. I am in conversation today with Roger Wolsey, whose new book is not Kissing Fish, which was his last book, but Discovering Fire, Spiritual Practices that Transform Lives. And Roger, I wanted to ask you something in terms of your writing. It seems to me that because you're a pastor, you have a vested interest in trying to keep somebody in your church in terms of getting a paycheck. I know that sounds nasty, but I don't mean it that way. In the same way that I have a vested interest in writing a next book because I earn my living that way. And so, of course, I'm interested in high school literacy programs because, God damn it, if there are not more readers, you know, we can't just have 70-year-olds my age as my reader. We all have a vested interest in something, and hopefully those of us who have integrity rise above that and still speak truth to the best of our ability. That said, in the best of all worlds, would you like more people to be coming to churches? I won't say necessarily your church, as in, okay, I'll give you an example. I wrote a book a while back called Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy. In the best of all worlds, I would like more people to enjoy what I'm enjoying as a grandfather, which means staying in a relationship with someone and having a child, which means sticking around long enough in one place to know your neighbors and build a life. I'm selling a point of view. Now, it doesn't result in more than a book sale, so I'm not, you know, this isn't getting somebody to come to my church or organization, but still, what is the point of view you're selling in your book? As in, what is your final end game? Will you be happy if they just all still are out there looking at tarot cards and sound baths and a little bit of yoga here and the other? Or would you like them to be reintroduced to a more structured church experience that includes, say, coming to your church and making a donation and keeping that form of spirituality going? Or is it okay to just be at Running Man once a year and that's your thing? What would you like to see happen? Yeah,
so those are excellent questions. So I'll just go for it. So I'd like to think anyone who reads this will not experience an agenda for someone to become a Christian, or let alone a United Methodist Christian or progressive Christian, that there's really no agenda, that it's really done in an objective, fair-minded way, but coming from a particular perspective. You know, I own my perspective. And And I don't think anyone needs to go to church. No, I think.
But aren't they missing something in terms of community? If it's just pick and choose online spirituality, download something on your phone,
All right,
I would tell them they're crazy. I would say you can't be part of your community unless there's some flesh and blood involved. Where are you doing community? And it better not just be on your phone.
So I'm definitely in favor of community and accountability and growing together and kindred spirits being in connection, a shared communion, a fellowship. But that can look like many possible ways. Christianity doesn't have a monopoly on that. And frankly, so to get to your question, I wouldn't want people going to most churches as they are now. So my hope is this book can begin to help some churches more and more shift to a mindset of, we don't have a monopoly on how God is at work in people's lives. We have some strong suits and perspective. Can we shift to more of a curiosity, more humble sharing? Well, this is how we see Spirit working. How do you see it? And more of a more humble, conversational, story swapping perspective, rather than we have the truth. This is the way. And so most churches, I don't think, have that more humble, open perspective yet. I know some that do, thankfully. Otherwise, I frankly couldn't be a Christian. But it's certainly a minority, it feels like. And so I'm hoping this book begins to help more people involved in some churches to begin to change how church understands itself.
Do you think, from that point of view, my producer, Ernie Gregg's husband, Rock, is a pastor, and I'm not being cute here, but is this a book Rock should read in terms of helping him reach people in a more complete way as a pastor of a church who's a progressive person himself? Would this be helpful to people who are in church work themselves? Absolutely.
It'll help them understand what people who are the spiritual practices that people aren't in church are doing. That's certainly important information. But on top of that, if we care about salvation, and by that, I mean a more Jewish understanding of wholeness, well-being, liberation in the here and now, less about whatever happens after we die. Well, if we care about wholeness, well-being, care of people, then these practices actually are things that at least create favorable conditions for healing to take place. And so we can increase our medicine bag. We can increase our awareness. And maybe we don't have to be experts in these things, but we can know who in our community does do these things and make referrals and have a more collaborative approach to people's lives, rather than thinking we're the one and done only shop, right?
I have a question for you, just as someone who I know, as a wise person I run into on the road sometimes at places like the Wild Goose Festival, and the writing you're doing, but also your experiences as a pastor. Just to change the subject and not, this is not specifically about your book at all, but it seems to me we had the COVID pandemic. I just got another, I think my third booster shot 3 days ago, because I'm doing some traveling this summer, and I already had COVID once, but I want to get another light case if I get it. But one of the things that would be most concerning to me, that's happening out there, other than the Russia attacking Ukraine and more pandemics and so forth, is what can credibly be called a loneliness pandemic. How would you define that pandemic? How would you diagnose it? And what are some of the things we can be doing, particularly for younger people, to diminish the impact of this loneliness pandemic, wherein you find people having more and more trouble just making the most basic connections that, for instance, in my youth, I took for granted? Dating, meeting people, romantic connections, everything's getting delayed longer and longer and longer, in terms of all those kind of ordinary human things. How do you analyze that as a pastor from what you've seen? And you have kids in that age bracket, if you might put it that way. And then what's to be done about it? Because it seems to me that of everything that's happening to our country right now, the loneliness pandemic is probably the root cause of more problems than anything we can imagine, whether it's school shootings or anything else. It just is a huge, huge thing out there. You're a pastor, how do you see that?
Yeah. So how I answer that now is different than what I might have said 10 years ago or something. I think I'm an extrovert, and as I have aged, I've found my inner introvert and appreciate some solitude now. And so COVID in a way was a gift for me to kind of force me to be with myself. And I share that. So there's a gift of solitude for some people. Too much of anything, even water, can kill you though. So I want to start by naming that there is gift there. But the answer isn't extroversion for everybody. Just join this soccer program, just join this scouting program, to be in this band, go to these martial arts. I mean, all of those are beautiful things that can be empowering and provide a sense of community to kids. We're in this together, a sense of team. And the church does not by any means have a monopoly on that. So to some extent, those need to be out there as part of the answer, having some of those offerings, whatever they are. But it is the case that a lot of people, I'm going to think of teen boys in particular, that often are gaming. I know in Japan kind of hit this before the US did. A lot of their young men are preferring to play games at home after work rather than date. And their population, marriages are being postponed. Their already low birth rate is handicapped further because these young men, frankly, would rather play video games than date. And where does that come from? Well, there's a certain sense of escaping reality, the harshness of reality. There's a certain sense of, I can't measure up. I could never satisfy a woman. I don't have the tools. And so I'm just out of the game. I'm just going to vote myself off the island. That's a little bit of the mindset. I don't know that that's fully true in the States, and I don't want to overstate it for Japan either, but there's some truth to what I'm saying. Mm. And so providing tools to help people engage, and I don't know the magic answer, but it doesn't have to be done in churches, and probably be better if it weren't, but in coffee shops or in streets, by the farmer's market, on a lawn, places where people will gather, and somehow get the word out that we're going to have a nonviolent communication workshop. We're going to have a authentic relating workshop where we're going to get to know and deepen from superficial conversations to more meaningful ones, and start offering those more and more. And that can be interspersed in the martial arts, the soccer, the church, whatever, or it can be special things created for that. Probably it needs to be multiple prongs, but people aren't going to do that if they don't feel equipped. And so things like nonviolent communication, learning about that, super important. Learning about authentic relating and circling, I highly recommend those practices. People are craving that, but they aren't seeing it modeled. And so everybody in all of these domains, including the church, really would do well to bone up on some of these things so that they can begin to model and have that be part of their DNA. And therefore, it's more compelling for people. That's just some off the top thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Okay, switch topics again. I'm cashing in on having you here to talk to you about a range of things. Just counting on the fact you've done some observing. What do you see in terms of the direction of next chapter for Christian nationalism in our country? 70% of evangelicals still think that Donald Trump won the election and that it was stolen. What's our future with a heavily armed population hoarding guns and ammunition, bitterness and delusional theories of conspiracy? Combined with the kind of evangelical energy that my dad and I helped launch in the 70s and 80s to, quote, take back our culture from whoever the enemy is, be that women who want abortions, gay people, whomever, fill in the blank. Today it's trans, etc. You're out there, you're looking around, you're talking to people. What do you see coming down the pike? What are we heading into in terms of a confrontation between people who seem to want a civil war and the rest of us?
All right, I've got. So yes, I've been observing, and my observations have different results and possibilities. So on the one hand, we'll start with a positive. On the one hand, I would say things like homophobia, transphobia have a shelf life. Most of the folks who have those perspectives 10 years from now aren't going to be here. It's literally got a shelf life. It's a dying off mentality. If you look at some of the studies that have been out in the last few years, one of them, I think it was Time Magazine or Newsweek, had it as high as 40% of Gen Z identify as LGBTQ. I've seen another study that's more like 30%, but anywhere between 30 and 40% of a whole generation identifying as LGBTQ. Well, that's amazing. That's profoundly larger than my Gen X perspective, where maybe it's closer to 10%. That's a big jump. And so from at least on the homophobia issue, the transphobia issue, it's pretty much a non-issue. My 22-year-old son, like, why is this even an issue? It's 2023. Get real, people. I mean, and of course his generation, at least I'll speak just to him. He's seeing polyamory and all sorts of things that are just like people live their lives, whatever. So his comfort zone of what's available out there and that's okay, kind of stretches me and like, okay. But the fact of the matter is, this more narrowistic, limited perspective, I think, is dying out, and politics, is going to show it pretty quickly. And we already saw it. What was supposed to be a red wave in the midterms was, they barely secured a bare minimum in the House. They got no mandate. They just think they do. They're trying to say they do. But Gen Z is going to show up politically, and they're going to be showing up religiously, mostly voting with their butts, not showing up. And unless churches change, they're not going to show up, or they're going to create their own things. So that's one piece of hope, actually, is that just sheer numbers are going to force out a more bigoted perspective. That said, that bigoted perspective is not going out without a fight. There is a sort of like the wicked witch of the, what is it, east or west? I'm melting. She's going out screaming and hollering, and there's a lot of backlash, and it's ugly and it's real. People are being beat up and killed. This is real. Laws are being changed right now to make it illegal to talk about being LGBTQ or trans. It's
at the same time as other laws are making it easier and easier to carry a gun without a background check or even a permit.
Exactly. So
at any age, at any time, for any reason.
Exactly. So there is reason to be concerned, especially the next, say, 5 years could be pretty damn ugly. I think it would be naive to say everything's going to be hunky dory. No. Who was the great Black speaker? Frederick Douglass, I believe it was Douglass. Progress happens, but it only is maintained with a fight. I'm paraphrasing here. You have to constantly maintain what you've got and keep fighting and fighting. There is no end to the fight.
Yeah.
So there is that truth that has to be remembered as well. So in a way, Malcolm X was kind of the Black Panther by any means necessary perspective, and Dr. King, the more beloved community, appeal to the higher angels of people. And we're probably going to need both of those perspectives again in this generation.
Well, one problem we have now is that, you're talking about cycles of change generationally and elections where you don't have a mandate. But if one party no longer accepts election results as legitimate unless they win, then what you're facing is not a system where the majority prevails, but you have to ask yourself, do the people refusing to acknowledge defeat and claiming to have won have the muscle and are embedded enough within our system to, in essence, launch what will resemble an apartheid system? where a strong, armed, angry minority with chunks of the law behind them, perhaps, certainly the Supreme Court majority behind them in terms of the 6-person right-wing Republican majority now. What happens when they refuse political results or load local chambers of commerce and library boards and school boards with their own people to the point where democracy just doesn't matter anymore because they are going to derail the system unless they win from the local level on up? That is the strategy of the Republican right today, right now. That's what they're doing.
It's true. There is a rather fascist, scorched earth, realpolitik, might makes right kind of thuggery that is showing up. I think Gen Z is seeing it and disgusted. And there's a lot of savvy young people. There's some of the folks that we've been seeing that were boxed out of their state legislatures. They are showing up with in a way that boxing out of them was a gift. They are showing like, holy, look out now look out. They are showing up with eloquence and vision, and it's a compelling vision. And people want part of that and not part of the anxious energy of fear-based thinking. One is obviously more compelling. And now I'm enough of a person of faith to say, yeah, love will win, but it's not going to be without a fight. And it's through those leaders and that agitation, that organization, that things will happen. So it's not just going to be passively waiting our time for the next 10 years to play out while another generation moves on. No, we can know that it's looking like things are going to be in favor for a better perspective, but it won't happen without, frankly, a fight, a lot of organization, a lot of passion, a lot of creative genius working together. And I think this book can maybe help unite people that maybe don't think they could be united. How can we find allies in this perspective? Because the liberal portion of the church can't do it alone. We need allies, and the yoga community can't do it on its own. We kind of need to find ways to join forces. And so this kind of thing maybe can be a tool toward that end.
Yeah, and as we wrap up here, I don't want to throw a last question at you that should take another 1 hour talk, although we can rebook and do another one. But let's just go here for a minute. It seems to me that as a kind of an outside observer, because I'm not part of the progressive Christian movement or the evangelical movement, I have sort of, I describe myself as an atheist who believes in God. I'm outside of this framework. Now, doesn't mean I'm not involved, nor do I care. I mean, that's why we're talking, because I care passionately about the issues we're discussing. But I kind of have a general critique of what I think is a sort of a delusional progressive Christianity, which I think overestimates its impact. And every time I get into those environments, I find a bunch of people who are talking to themselves. That is not a hit on progressive Christianity, because we're all living in our bubbles. Okay, I'm a big follower of women's professional skiing. Michaela Schifrin is my hero. She's on television all the time, but I run into people who've never heard of her who ski, and it's like, well, where the hell have you been? I mean, that's like not knowing that F1 means Formula One. Like, what's your problem here? But isn't it amazing that we all live in these little bubbles? And it seems to me that progressive Christianity, I won't call it evangelical Christianity, is in its own bubble. And so I'm going to throw a hard question at you and give you time to answer it. Why is progressive Christianity, progressive religion in general, Christianity in particular, just apparently so ineffectual and milquetoast and lacks, it seems to me, the resolve or the mental toughness to actually get anything done, except just talk about love, 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 love? Great. Okay, where are the teeth that actually gets into this? Or let me flip it and make it even nastier. Where's the seriousness reflected in progressive Christianity that you found in the Proud Boys charging into the Chamber of Congress and being willing to take over the US government to bring change? And I'm not saying progressive Christianity should use force, but where's the resolve? Crazy as the QAnon resolve has been, crazy as the Trump resolve has been, crazy as the MAGA resolve has been, we've seen resolve. I don't see that matched on the progressive side. other than with nice words and more conferences, talk. Where does the rubber hit the road where we're going to actually bring some change and see a contribution from progressive Christianity that can be measured? Like, before these guys did this, we were here. After your book came out and became a thing and people did what you told them to do, and then look, 10 years down the road, it changed everything. I don't want to put you on the spot, but where's the actual resolve? Where does the rubber hit the road with progressive Christianity? It just seems to me to be very wishy-washy.
Yeah. So I'll answer in two ways. First of all, I'll say your observation is a fair one. It's pointed and prophetic and fair. Where I see the most resolve and passion and energy, frankly, is on the environmental front, trying to help more Christians, which is the largest religion on the planet, begin to start giving a damn about stewardship of God's green earth, creation care as essential to the faith. More and more people coming around to that, because we don't have a healthy planet to live on. We don't have a healthy planet for other social justice issues to play out on either. Mm-hmm. So there is definitely passion and energy on that front, it's an important front. That said, you're right. A whole lot of folks have never heard of progressive Christianity. They don't know some of the key authors or thinkers, and maybe never will. And it's not in any way like the civil rights movement of the 60s or anything. It's sort of ivory tower-ish in a certain way. That said, there are some voices. I think of Brandon Robertson, who has a young guy who came out of the evangelical world, felt a call to ministry, has become ordained. He's doing a lot on TikTok and reaching a lot of people as a TikTok ministry. I think of John Wesley, The World Is My Parish. Well, he's using TikTok, which is huge for young people and helping share a more progressive understanding. And he's got power and zip, and there's a lot of conservative backlash. So he's making some progress because he's getting so much heat coming at him. I hope he stays safe, but he's become a lightning rod. Now, there are a few
and Brandon, by the way, is someone that I've known for years and first met when he was a much younger man at Wild Goose. And he and I have been in connection for years. By the way, Ernie, take a note. I don't know why I haven't said we should do a podcast with Brandon, but let's track Brandon down and do one with him, because
there you go.
He's someone I've tracked with for years. Thank you for reminding me about Brandon. Continue with your good answer.
Yeah, so there are a few people here and there that are, frankly, through TikTok in particular, are ruffling feathers and making waves and having influence. They're getting pushback as a result, but I see signs of passion and promise and okay. And with that in mind, progressivechristianity.org in the last couple of years has really diversified the racial diversity of its board. And they are now creating TikToks as well and trying to, all right, you know what? Let's not just be all writing and essays. Let's go where people are. So they're doing TikToks and they're getting huge traction and also pushback. And the conservatives find it and hate on it. But you know that there's something happening when you see that pushback. Now, is that enough? No. But I do see some signs of hope and promise in some change in healthy directions. But I don't think progressive Christianity is the magic penny answer to everything. And I don't need my paycheck to say the United Methodist Church necessarily, or any church. I'm all about helping people heal and grow. And I know some things that can help with that, but I know I don't have it all. And so I hope more and more people can come around to a shared collaborative perspective. And that's where the dynamism, the synergy, and the power is less people saying our group has it and more, hey, we offer this. What do you got? What can we do to help? So it's all hands on deck. Everybody's showing up with what they've got and learning from each other. That's where the passion and fire, I think, really is.
Okay, this is Frank Schaeffer. You have been listening to In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, a podcast. If you like it, please like it in the online sense of liking it and sharing it. Please let people know about Roger's book, Discovering Fire, Spiritual Practice That Transform Lives. And we will link to the book Roger Wolsey, so people will be able to find it easily. We will link to anything you tell my producer, Ernie, you want to link to, your church, how people can contact you for speaking, for getting in touch, for whatever. So Ernie will take note of whatever you want him to link to. And then when this comes out, which it will soon, then you can share it if you think this has been a good discussion on your book, and let people know they can watch this podcast In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, speaking with you about the book, because I think we covered a lot of topics which actually make your book very relevant. So the questions I was asking you, putting you on the spot a little bit, I think are very much in the direction of saying, okay, here's why Roger wrote this book. This is what the book is about. I hope you feel that way.
Yeah, we did justice to that, and what I'm hoping to do here. Thank you so much.
Oh, a genuine pleasure, and all the best to your son. Say hi to him for me.
I will.
And thanks for reminding me that Brandon's out there doing interesting things, because I haven't talked to him for a while. It's time to catch up.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Roger.
All right.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
You bet. Bye-bye.